Today, President-elect Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th President of the United States, and the world will be watching as he walks into multiple domestic and international challenges. President Trump leaves behind a mixed legacy in foreign relations, a different world than what Biden experienced as vice president 4 years ago. Now, the Biden administration must work to rebuild trust with U.S. allies and determine what needs to be prioritized to speed up America's economic recovery and restore its diplomatic missions. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Mark Phillips joins us now to help unpack the foreign challenges President-elect Joe Biden will face in the White House. Thanks for joining us, Mark. In your opinion, what is the biggest foreign policy challenge that the Biden administration is facing as he enters office?
Well, I suppose the first part of the answer to that question is how long have you got? There's no magic switch that has been thrown here that changes all of the difficulties and all of the situations that have been created over the past 4 years. At noon in Washington today, all of the problems that have existed until now in the Middle East, with China, with Iran, with North Korea, with Russia, still exist, but there's a huge attitudinal difference here. There have been a number of messages expressed already today, and I'll read some of them out from the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. He says that he's greatly relieved that Joe Biden will be inaugurated as president. That's a candid expression you don't normally hear from the houses of power across Europe. The European Commission chief, Ursula von der Leyen, says after 4 long years, Europe has a friend in the White House. America seems to have changed, questions like that. However, in places like Iran, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says a tyrant's era has come to an end today, so they're looking for something different from a Biden administration. But perhaps the most candid comment of all came from the head of the government in Scotland, one of the devolved regional governments here in the UK. Her response from Nicola Sturgeon was cheerio to Donald. She said, "Don't haste ye back." So I think we can take it from that. There's a sense of kind of general relief that at least the uncertainties and the bumpy ride that both allies and adversaries have experienced over the past 4 years might come to an end. But there's also a pretty widespread understanding that this will not be a complete flip-flop in America's attitude, both to its allies and to its adversaries, that there are difficulties of all sorts that still remain. Yes, the Biden administration says it will rejoin the Paris Accords, for example, but what does that mean? Yes, the administration says it will rejoin the Iran deal, the Iran anti-nuclear deal, but what price might Tehran ask for that deal to be reinstated, and what state is the enrichment of uranium in Iran at this stage? A lot has changed, and all of these will be challenges, of course, to an incoming administration.
Really, really excellent, Mark, to have those thoughts from some of those other world leaders. And as you know, the president-elect will soon be calling on some of our allies to essentially put their faith in America. I wonder what impact the Trump years have had on America's standing in the world, because the current president, President Trump, until noon, loves to say that that we are respected all over the world since he was elected president of the United States. But you know, we've seen from some of our allies some of the pointed statements that they've made over the course of the last 4 years that don't seem to indicate that. So what is your sense of the Trump years vis-a-vis our allies, and what would the president-elect need to do to either strengthen that relationship or to engage even further than President Trump did?
Well, I think one of the reactions is something that's already been expressed, that they're expecting the allies, the Western European, the other American allies, are expecting a re-engagement of the U.S. In a more cooperative approach to international problems, whether that be China, whether that be Russia, wherever that comes from. But at the same time, they're approaching that with a little wariness that has been learned, if you will, over the past 4 years. They consider Trumpism and the support for President Trump and the 70-odd million Americans who voted for him to have been a real thing. And there is, behind every comment, welcoming America back into the international fold, to put words in people's mouths, but that's the kind of sentiment you hear, is a worry that, that America has demonstrated over these past 4 years a quite happy willingness to be outside of the international fold, and that there is great support in the U.S. for the kind of America Firstism that Donald Trump represented, and there's a fear and a wonder whether this next administration, these next 4 years, will be a reversion to the kind of 7 decades long relationship that the Allies have had with the U.S. since the Second World War, or whether the last 4 years are an indication of the kind of bumpy ride that the future holds as well, and that the next Donald Trump, or the same Donald Trump, might in fact be back. So I think you're looking at a welcoming of all of the noises that have come out of Washington, but you're also looking at a certain wariness on behalf of the Allies as to what kind of role the U.S. Will take, and that, of course, all remains to be seen.
Just to let the audience know, oh, now we flipped. We were looking, we were showing some images just outside of St. Matthew's Church. It looks like somebody had fallen down the steps there, where the president-elect was attending Mass this morning. He had invited Mitch McConnell and his family, and Kevin McCarthy and his family, in, you know, a show of unity, which will be the theme of his inaugural address. In regards to sort of foreign policy, you know, the Trump administration was unconventional in many ways, and certainly, you know, many critics would say made some foreign policy missteps. It puts the Biden administration in an interesting position. You have all these sanctions in Iran. You have, you know, an administration pulling out of agreements. In a way, for Biden initially to sort of right things a little bit, he just has to kind of undo a few things that the previous administration did. And that is, in fact, his plan, I think, starting today. He wants to roll back travel bans that were in place. He wants to, as you point out, put America back into the Paris Climate Agreement. Will simply just sort of rolling back some of the things that the Trump administration implemented, will that be good enough to help to restore America's credibility on the world stage?
Well, it's a start, I think, and it, you know, remains to be seen. All of this assumes that the situations remain static, and they don't remain static. We're anticipating some sort of negotiation with Iran as to what, as you say, there are sanctions in place, as to what gets lifted, what kind of guarantees there will be, whether the agreement can be expanded beyond the pure nuclear and into Iran's influence on what the West would describe as disruptive, even terrorist influences in the Middle East and around the world. These are, again, it's not just flipping a switch and putting things back the way they were, because the world has changed in the meantime. In terms of North Korea, for example, it's very much anticipated that perhaps the first foreign policy test will come from there. There are rumors of more missile tests, and North Korea now developing a missile with the capability of being launched from submarines, and that kind of thing. So, you know, it's the old events, dear boy. We don't know quite what will happen, but it's very likely that there will be some sort of test. Again, in terms of Paris, you know, Paris was the climate accords. Paris was a statement of ambition. To keep the level of temperature rise across the planet to a certain level, 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade.
Mark, let me just point out that we're just seeing the outgoing Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the outgoing Transportation Secretary, his wife Elaine Chao, leaving, and I think everybody's wearing a mask, which is a good thing. So I'm trying to, you know, see if I can recognize folks as they come out of St. Matthew's Cathedral here in Washington D.C. But I did catch a glimpse of Mitch McConnell and Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's right. Just to wrap up quickly on climate change, that whole agreement has gotten to the stage now where countries are having to make pledges as to how they're going to reduce their emissions down to their carbon dioxide emissions down to net zero, and people will be looking at the United States to see how they can do it. Dates, you know, by 2050, by 2035, levels down to this and that level. People will be waiting to see just what it means for the U.S. to declare that it's coming back into the fight against climate change, and how much of an economic investment they're prepared to make for that. So it's a time of less uncertainty, I would say, than over the past 4 years, where the assumption has been, obstruction and disruption from Washington. But at the same time, people are waiting to see just what this new administration will do on all these matters.
We just caught a glimpse of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We also did catch a glimpse of the incoming Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer leaving St. Matthews. I didn't see the president-elect, so I don't know if he's still in there or if he might still be inside the church. But he is, as soon as he departs St. Matthews, on his way to the inauguration, where he will be sworn in as the nation's 46th President of the United States. So, Mark, one of the things, and we should point out to our viewers, that there was a fairly significant foreign policy win, and that was the establishment of relations between the State of Israel and several of Gulf countries and states that had historically not been friends of Israel, that the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was able to push through. I wonder, because it's something that a lot of other presidents have attempted to do and were not able to do so. Is there an opportunity there for Tony Blinken, the incoming Secretary of State, to build on these relations with the State of Israel and some of the other players in the region?
Well, we already know there will be some continuity involved. Mr. Blinken has already said that the embassy, for example, which the Trump administration moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, will now stay in Jerusalem, and that will continue to be the case. The various agreements between Israel and the Gulf states primarily, do what they do to kind of lessen tensions across the region, but they're seen very much as an anti-Iran arrangement. It's all, the whole political scene in Israel is unsettled these days. The Netanyahu government has been establishing, or at least licensing, more settlements in the West Bank. Netanyahu's future, both legally, he's of course facing a court case, and politically, he's facing another election. Still to be resolved as well. So, I think in the Middle East, as with everywhere else, the ground zero is now, and things move forward from what has been created over the past 4 years, and where we go from here. But again, what we're not seeing is a retrenchment to U.S. positions prior to the Trump administrations. You're not seeing an embassy move back or out of Jerusalem. These agreements between Israel and the various Gulf states which the U.S. brokered will continue to endure, and we'll just have to wait and see where it all goes from here.
We're just watching live pictures right now, Mark and Anne-Marie, of the pomp and circumstance as we await the President-elect of the United States, Joe Biden, along with Dr. Jill Biden and Kamala Harris, Vice President-elect, along with her husband, Doug Emhoff, to arrive there at the Capitol. Always a thrilling moment when you hear the band strike up the flourishes as they prepare to welcome the incoming president and vice president. It looks a little different because there are not, thousands and thousands and thousands of people there cheering. But I got to tell you, there's a bit of familiarity to it, to see those flags draped across the front of the United States Capitol, where only 2 weeks ago we saw flags of a very different type being brandished by insurrectionists. To see our United States military and the Marine Corps marching band there playing those flourishes as they prepare to, as the president-elect prepares to take to those steps where he will be sworn in, is kind of remarkable. So we'll probably be dipping in and out to listen, Mark, as we watch this. Mark Phillips, always great to have you. Thank you so much for your insight and your reporting and your analysis on this historic day. Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.